joining Lunch and Learn today. So I'm Dylan Roberts. I'm a solutions architect here on the professional services team at Decisions. So feel free throughout this session, ask any questions, feel free to put it in the chat, happy to answer, and also happy to go over some demos of different features if you would like to see. So kind of just opening up the floor. Does anyone have any questions to kind of start off with? If you do, feel free to put them in the chat. If not, there is a couple of different use cases or different features that I would like to go over today. Throughout that time, though, if you have any questions, please ask. Also, if any other demos you want to see, just feel free to put that in the chat as well. So first thing I want to start off with is a couple of things around case entities. So in particular with case entities, there's a couple of features in dashboards that aren't heavily used, which I think it might be because not enough people know about. So with case entities, it's essentially a folder created. And with that, you have different pieces of data tied to that folder. For instance, one would be your different states that case would go through. On top of that, users can add comments to your case entity. You can add assignments to your case entity, documents within your case entity. And there is one component that helps show all of that information, and it's called a folder state view. So what that looks like is here's a couple of example case entities that I have built. We go into it. I set my dashboard with this folder state view here, which contains the different states that my case entity can go through. And it'll show pretty much the different pieces of data tied to my case entity. So what this is showing now are comments that have been added into this case entity. If there were documents, you'd be able to see which documents were added. You'd be able to see who added them, when they were added, which state they were added. And this is a really useful, that's just drag and drop with case entities when you're building your dashboard. So let me go here and kind of show which exact thing I'm showing here. So this is called a folder activity panel. So this would be the dashboard that I've set up for my case entity. And you can see here, it's under my favorites. I use it quite often. It's called folder activity panel. And this really shows a lot of data for your case entity without you having to do very much to it. So for example, you can at any point, users that are on this case view dashboard could just say, add any comment they want. Add it directly to here, and other employees or other users within the system accessing this dashboard would have access to view that comment. So it's good actually if you are, let's say your case entity is used to work some piece of like a request. This could really come in handy if you need to have a chat back and forth between different users. You could say, if you're both looking at a request and you maybe have some questions, you could kind of go back and forth through here. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean with a comment, it's an assignment, but it is a way that you can add just a comment in there and view some back and forth between two people. So on top of that, what this allows you to also do is just upload some documents directly to it for people to view. And from this page component in particular, you can download the document or update the document. This component also allows you to kind of set some configuration around it. Maybe you just want to see comments or just assignments. You have the ability now to hide and show different pieces of data, but you also have the ability to search through here. So if I want to search for a new comment, like let's say right now it's really easy to kind of see everything, but let's say there's 60, 70, 100 comments in here. You can search it at a point in time to figure that out. So this is one really useful piece to a case entity. So some other components that you could use would be like a state timeline. Let's see. So a folder timeline here. And this will show you your states that your case entity has traveled through. So just by saving that, you can see here that it's a really simple case entity. It just has a started and a completed state. So there's only two pieces here. But what this would do is kind of show you at what point in time your case is in. So in this case, it's in the started state, which is marked here, and that the next state, if it was to go in sequential order, would be completed. However, that sometimes won't be the case. It jumps around, and that's the benefit of using a case entity. It doesn't have to go in like a sequential order. You can bounce around between states. So those are just really two pieces that I find really useful with case entities and when building case views specific to a process that really help users interact with the case. So are there any questions around that? Questions on the components that I just kind of showed? Okay, so I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So there is a couple more topics I wanted to cover. So one is regarding rules. Oh, I see there's one question. Go ahead. Feel free to put it in the chat or come off of mute.
Yeah, this is, I'm just curious, not related to case entities at all, if that's all right. But I want to populate a drop-down list, and I'm getting it from two kind of different possible sources. I'm wondering what the best way is to convert it into, you know, kind of a unified type that the drop-down can connect to.
Yeah, of course. So with that, probably the way I'd go is if they're two separate sources and you're just displaying, so this is where it's going to get a little tricky. Since they are two different types, it's going to be hard to get the dropdown to respect that. So one thing you could do is create a flow structure that has some common fields between both types. So like I'm assuming both of your types would have like a name field, and that name or something would be what you want to show in the dropdown. Exactly. And tied to that, they have an ID. So what you could do is create a flow structure, and let's walk through it. So the benefit of the flow structure is really just to structure your data into something that you can use for this dropdown. So let me see. I'll just call it common dropdown. Let's say field ID. And with this, what I would do is in the flow that you're using to populate that dropdown, I would fetch the data from both of those tables and then map it to that common structure, to this one we just created called, I don't know why I can't think of it. I just called it a common dropdown structure where it has like a name and ID. Yep. That way, when you're building your form, you set the dropdown to be that type, and you could set it to the name field. That way you have an ID. Well, thinking through that now a little more, you might need an additional field to determine which type of object that was selected from. So if like you just had name and ID, when the user says, I want this value, and you continue on with that process, that wouldn't really tell you which object to fetch from based off of that ID.
Yeah, so, but like, is it kind of like a brute force situation whereby you fetch all, like, let's say you've got an employees type, and you've also got like the accounts data structure from decisions. Like, do you actually have to basically cycle through them like in a for each loop and add them to a list of your new flow type kind of thing?
Not necessarily. You could join them and create a type from that join in particular. So like you could say, because an employee extends to account or vice versa, account extends to an employee, you could join. And by creating that relationship, so that would be, let me see, where is it? You would create a relationship here, and you could call it like the employee's account. And you would say that you want your employee type to extend to your account type. You choose which IDs make that relationship, and it'll generate a data type for you from that with all of the fields from both combined.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep. So that's probably the easiest way that I would approach that scenario. Another way wouldn't really be useful with drop downs in particular. Actually, it could be. And it's called data extensions. So what data extensions do is allow you to extend an object. So let's say you have your employee object, and data extensions can be set up from the systems folder. Let me see, system, designers, lookup listing constants, and here add data extension. And what this allows you to do is specify your primary type. So you could say the input to this data extension would be my employee. Let me just create, I'll just create one on the account just to show account. So account test extension, like here, you would be able to say your primary type is your employee. And in this case, I'm just going to choose my account type. That is what I have. Within this data extension workflow, what you would do is say, I want to, whenever I use employee and someone, and I want the ability to choose an attribute or a field from my account table in your example. You would set up a fetch flow in here to fetch your account based off of your ID, whatever that relationship is, and you would output it to the end step, that account object. So whenever you use your employee object, you'll see now that there's an attribute called account, and it's an object where you can choose any of the account fields from it. The value of that is it now gives you the ability in your workflows to say, whenever I'm referencing employee, I can always pull an account type. And this workflow will only run if you're using an attribute from your extension type. So in your example, if you used an attribute from the account type, then this flow would run to get the data to use, whether it's in a workflow or a rule. So I think I actually have an example to go over. It is a little bit more of a confusing concept, but let me try to find it. Data extension example, perfect. Okay, so I have a car as my primary type, and a car has a car owner and a purchase details for the car. So I have a data extension set up here called my car owner extension. And what I did was I input to this workflow my car object, and then I would fetch my car owner based off of the car ID. And what I'm going to output is the car owner object that I fetched. So now when I go to build a rule, I have the ability to say, when I select my main core, my main car object, I can see here that I have an available property of car owner with all of those attributes.
Right.
And the cool thing about data extensions is that workflow you set up will only ever pull that data in for car owner if you're using one of these attributes. So like if you're building rules against the car object in this case and not using anything from car owner, that workflow will actually never run. It'll only run when you're saying, I want to reference something from car owner.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. So I would say that's probably another approach to look at. And this one kind of gives you a little bit more ability. So whenever you're using your employee object for your example, you'd be able to reference some account fields.
Yeah, so it's not, that's not really I mean, that is I've learned something useful here, but it's not really the use case because like I've got a flow coming along, and depending on a condition, I will either go and get a list from the accounts object,
Yep.
or I will go and get a list from the employees object. And
okay.
so basically, I end up with two lists, right? But I need to map that back into a single type that that the drop-down list will be able to understand. So I think it's more of like having your intermediary flow type there.
Yep.
I can populate from whichever one ends up getting the values from.
Yep, agreed. I think that first route we went down sounds like the best option for that with that flow structure.
Yeah, and like, is there a way that you can just you can do a mass map of, say, that this type is like, I'm kind of unfamiliar with like, I mean, I immediately start building a for loop to, you know, to loop through them and add to a list kind of thing.
Yep. So there's actually a step to actually do that, for you. It's called a list mapping step.
All right. Okay.
Yep. And so let me show you the settings on it. List mapping. So you choose your output type. So in this case, it would be, I think I called it dropdown, common dropdown, and you choose your input. So let's say it's like a list of accounts. Let me just try that again. Let's get all accounts. And that would be my input here. What you would do is show item editor. You would say for my account object for one instance of it. Let's see. Oh, why can't I build data? Let me see real quick. Oh, there it is. Okay. I could say I want like, let's see. Where's email? Email would be my field name and then account ID. Account ID, we go to my field ID. Why is it not liking me right now? Let me just save this and refresh real quick. Okay, so it did map for me. So what I did was say for one instance of an account, I want to map my account ID to my common field ID, and I want to map my email address to my field name. And then this step will now output you a list of your common type.
Okay, fantastic. That's exactly what I'm looking for.
Yep. Perfect.
Okay, great. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. This step, it comes in handy now that once I first learned this step, I now just you found so many places where I could have implemented it before. I use it quite often, actually.
Gotcha.
It's a really useful step.
Okay, great, brilliant.
Okay, do you have any other questions that you wanted to cover? So I think I could show, there's one more thing I wanted to kind of just show. It'll be pretty brief, but it's with enabling and disabling rules. So this now comes to a specific use case. So it might not really be relevant to your project, but it's good to kind of keep in the back of your mind if you do come across one of these scenarios. So let me go ahead and create a rule set. Let me go create a new rule set. Oh. So let me set up. I'm just going to pass in a couple fields here. I'm just going to put the first name. And let me just put each. So now I'm going to add a new rule that's going to evaluate first if the first name contains. Let me set this up. So let me say first name contains Dylan. So what this rule is just a simple evaluation rule, but the really cool thing I want to show here is the settings to enable and disable a rule. So within your rule set, you can build many rules, or even within workflows, you can have many rules, but you have the ability to say that by default, your rule, of course, will be enabled. You could disable it, which means whenever you call it, it's not going to run. But a cool thing here is setting a beginning and end date. You could say, here's a new rule that I want to add to my rule set, and I want to see how it's going to evaluate over a series of time, but I don't want it to always run. You could say I want it to maybe run just this week. So like if we said 410 through 414. What this setting does now is say when you call this rule set or call this rule, if it's between these dates, run it. If it's not, we're going to skip this rule. So there's probably very specific use cases that you would want to use that for, but I think it's a really cool thing to to kind of know about just in the back of your mind. So I'll show an example of how you use this real quick. So I set those dates to run just this week, 4/10 through 4/14. Let me go and build a flow to run the rule set. Let's see, run rule set. Going to pick the one that I just created. Going to put age of 25, and then I'm going to put first Dylan. And then you'll see here the key thing when enabling and disabling and setting dates is the date to test for, the active date. This is the date where you could set, if you want to be with current, you could say, I want this to be the current date time. So when it goes to run that rule, it would look, is this rule enabled for this week? Is today between these two dates? So if I debug this, you can see now that our rule ran because it's set between the 10th and the 15th. Now, if we were to go here and say that this ran on Monday the 3rd, you would see here that nothing actually ran in the rule set. And in your output to the rule set, you'll see that this rule is disabled or not in the date range. So what this kind of does is allow you to set a date to provide a date to your rule set, and then it will determine which rules it should run based off of enabling or disabling. So kind of like I mentioned before, there's really specific use cases, and it might not be for everyone to use, but it is a really cool feature just to know about. It could be a value of, let's say you've had your rule set in production for a while, and you want to see what happens if you're going to add like 2 or 3 rules to it. What are potential outcomes? You could add these rules in to that rule set and say, I want it to run just for 3 days, and then evaluate that data to see, well, this actually helped our rule set out. This provided more value to our what we're evaluating. So you can keep it within, add them back and set those dates off. So that's just one way to go about it. Okay, so does anyone have any questions? That was kind of all that I really had on the plate to kind of demo today. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions. So hopefully you guys were able to learn something new today. And if you have any more questions, feel free to join tomorrow's session. Jared Rodriguez will be running it. So have a good day, everyone.